Again, I'm Marcia Angarel, and I'm the Culture Affairs Officer of the Venezuela Affairs Unit. And I'll be your moderator again for this program, in which we discuss important female American leaders. Of course, we are continuing to do this program in English so that we can help you practice your English. And today, as usual, we'll have a short documentary, which for our sixth session, we will feature Kathryn Sullivan, an outstanding American geologist and former astronaut. And we also have back with us today the director of that documentary, Spencer Bacalar of Time Magazine. And welcome back, Spencer.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yes, hello. So we will, of course, ask her some questions, and we'll take questions from our audience. Please do put them into the chat. You can include comments on the topic of the film today or on female leadership in general. We're happy to share those comments as well as questions. But please, of course, remember that Spencer's not an expert on Kathryn Sullivan, but we can discuss other related topics such as glass ceilings that women have had to face or continue to face, among other such topics. And you can pose your questions in English or Spanish, and we'll translate those into Spanish for Spencer to answer. So again, we will welcome back Spencer. And for our last, since this will be our last session, we do want to thank you for your time and interest that you've shown in engaging with us throughout this series. So before we go to our film, let me just provide a little bit of background on Kathryn Sullivan. As I mentioned earlier, she's an American geologist and former NASA astronaut. She was also the first American woman to walk in space, which happened on October 11, 1984. She was also, just last year on June 7th, the first woman to participate in the Challenger Deep, in which she dived into the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest part of the Earth's oceans. So with that, let's go ahead and watch our film on Kathryn Sullivan. Okay, amazing. She's definitely a very brave and inspiring woman, Kathryn Sullivan is. So Spencer, welcome again, and thanks so much for being with us back for our final session. So we understand you're not an expert in Kathryn Sullivan, but she might just be one of the most fascinating specialists in the whole set of the Time First interviews, as she was not only the first American woman to walk in space, but you did that deep dive last year into the deepest part of the ocean. And she's clearly a woman who's faced and conquered many challenges. So what struck you most about her during the interview that you filmed with her?
Well, I loved interviewing Kathryn Sullivan. And like the other scientists on the list, she was deeply fascinating for me personally to interview. I grew up in a smaller town and went to a small high school that did not offer the best math and science education. So when I entered college and looked toward what I wanted to do as a living, I didn't have the access or the passion for the sciences. I mean, I guess I just didn't know it at the time. And it just hadn't been awakened yet. So interviewing women like Kathryn Sullivan or Sylvia Earle were some of my favorite interviews because I could feel their passion for the worlds they studied. And their passion infected me to the point of wondering what life might be like for me if I had chosen a different path. What I love about Kathryn is she's obviously had a first huge step as the first woman to walk in space, which can you imagine being that person? But when we interviewed her, she was also the head of NOAA, so it's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And I love that since then, she's been pushing for even more with her accomplishment last year. And I think it's that love and that passion for what these women are in that creates these really amazing outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. I can only imagine what that must have been like to talk to her in person about those experiences. So we do have today with us some questions from Access class, English Access class in Merida, as well as our Binational Center, SEVAM, that's also in Merida. And they I have a couple questions for us. So going to the first one, they say, I am an active student from Merida, Venezuela. I am 15 years old and would like to study science and technology to be a scientist in my country or abroad. So is there any advice that you have for women who would like to work in the field of science or non-traditional female workplaces? And I believe either of us can answer that.
Yeah.
But yes, go ahead.
I have some general advice. Obviously, I'm not connected to the science world, but I think generally it's so important to, as you're developing your passion for the research that you're going into, to also look around you and see who your connections are to the people who've already done the work that you really love. Or even if you don't have connections, find your role models, find your heroes. And it could be someone like Kathryn Sullivan, who's reached the very peak of what she does, or it could be someone in your region or university that can kind of take you under your wing a bit to mentor you. And this has been my experience in journalism, and I think it would be the same in the sciences as well. As people are more open than you'd expect to helping those who see themselves in you. So I would say don't be afraid to, study their work, reach out to them saying that you admire their work, that you're interested. Are there any internships that they're aware of? And I think just be bold and be bold in what you're interested in, and be bold in reaching out to get those connections to the people who do the work that you really like.
Exactly. I agree with all of that. And since, working for the U.S. government State Department, I can, honestly say that the number of programs that have grown in terms of awards and scholarships and all kinds of education opportunities to promote women in STEM, so in the field of science and technology, environment, and math. There are a lot of opportunities now, so I would encourage anyone interested in pursuing, one of these fields, to keep an eye out, do a little bit of research on the internet, and also definitely follow our U.S. Embassy Venezuela website and our social media, because we often do put on there opportunities for programs that can, help, those who are interested in pursuing any of these types of fields. So thank you for that question. Very good question. And then a second question from our access group in Merida says, having worked on a variety of stories going the range from environmental problems to terrorist attacks, do you have a favorite story among these interviews that you were able to do with these amazing women?
I don't have a favorite story. First is definitely probably one of the biggest things that I've done so far in my career, and really pushed me and helped me grow as a journalist, as a filmmaker, as a person. I'm usually very quiet and introverted, so sitting down in front of almost 50 women and asking them about their lives was a good step outside of my comfort zone. But I think I'm really grateful that I've never been boxed into a certain story or a certain beat. I've always really cherished the stories that boil down to like a simple idea or a simple human emotion that we can all relate to and we can see ourselves in, even if this person's life is completely different from your own. Like the stories that I've been able to do, that I can take the time to really show the humanity of who I'm working with. And I think those make the best stories and are often the most truthful and the most impactful. And I really appreciate things that can be boiled down into something we can all relate to.
Well, that's great. And I think, Matt, you mentioned that stepping out of your comfort zone, is one thing you do with this project, and just to show where it can take you when you do that.
Yeah.
Especially as we can see with Kathryn Sullivan as well, taking on, environments that very few people have
Right.
the chance to be in.
I actually, before this call, I was doing some digging into our old past interview questions and our old scripts for this video, just to see if there's anything that I had forgotten about. And a funny story from her interview that she said, one of her friends was asking her, has there ever been another woman who's gone as deep as you have and as high as you have? And she said, I'm pretty sure I got that one. And he said that she was the most vertical girl in the world. So that's even more true now that she's been the very deepest.
Totally. I mean, yeah, to be able to say that literally is really something.
Yeah.
We do have a question here in the chat for you. So, how does it feel to have been part of a team that won a Pulitzer Prize? And as a producer working on difficult stories where you probably have your own opinions, how do you remain independent and impartial in telling the truth? Or do you ever empathize with the bad guy?
It's definitely difficult. I think, what we're taught in journalism school, which I think is actually shifting a little bit. When I was in journalism school in 2010 to 2013, you're taught to be completely impartial, completely objective, absolutely no bias. You come in, you don't get attached to anyone, and you tell the story and you leave. But I think we're finding that as human beings, it's really difficult to do. And it's, especially if you spend long periods of time with people, it's really, really tough to go in, ask people to be really vulnerable with you, and not react at all. Also, in an interview setting, it's so much of a give and take that you're sitting and listening to what they're saying and empathizing with what, like, just as friends do when they're talking. If you talk to someone who didn't react at all, it would be quite strange. But I think the most important thing that I do in those situations is just listen, and do as much research as I can ahead of time to really understand who they are, what their world is, what the problems they're facing are. Because most likely, the majority of the people will be different than I am. So many people in the world. But it's just really, I think it's important to go into those situations as a human and with the larger goal in mind of what's important to be told, and what's important to share with wider audiences, and not necessarily leave objectivity at the door, but not to leave my humanity at the door either.
That's a great way to put it. Really.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can't imagine how difficult that must be to remain objective, at times, topics that can, just resonate with you more. And certainly nowadays you see more polarization in the United States
Totally.
and other places. That objectivity is really, really key, but that much harder. So thank you for that. So that's a good segue actually too, since this is our last session together. Are there other projects that you've worked on recently that you want to share with the audience?
I just yesterday finished producing a series for Time that is part of our usual offerings during the year. We have these lists called Time 100. This one is Time 100 companies. And we interviewed a few different CEOs, the CEO of the NBA, Adam Silver, or the commissioner of the NBA, Adam Silver, talking about how all the players lived and played in the bubble during the pandemic, the NBA finals. We talked to Reese Witherspoon and her new production company that's really trying to bring equity and diversity to film sets. I interviewed personally the CEO of a company called Illumina, which I think is super fascinating. I had never heard of it before I had to go shoot it. But basically their company has been there at every step of the way of the pandemic. They developed technology for genomic sequencing. And so basically from the very beginning, their machines were used to identify what the virus was, to identify the variants, to develop the tests, the diagnostic tests that we've all taken at this point, to develop the vaccines for Moderna, BioNTech, and they're also a part of the process of finding new variants even as the vaccines are rolling out. So it was really interesting to talk to him and talk about genomic future and how in the future it's democratizing health. It's making it easier and faster, obviously, to develop vaccines really quickly. But it could be a part of our everyday health going forward. It also, you can tell I'm really interested in it. They also use it to find cancers, to find other diseases that you might have. He said something about medications. There's a huge amount of money, I can't remember at the moment, that is spent on hospitalizations because people have bad reactions to medicine. But if you knew these things beforehand, you would know what medicines not to take. It's fascinating. I would look it up. So the series is called Time 100 Companies, or Time 100 Most Influential Companies. This company is called Illumina. So like illuminate, but without the T.
Well,
Yeah.
absolutely timely topic.
Yeah.
And I'm curious too, is that a project you did mostly online, or were you able to do any of that in person? You know, given the situation?
So I did two of the interviews in person. The ones that were on the West Coast. I'm based in LA, but I did the two on the West Coast of the US, and then a couple other people did the ones at different locations. But all of the editing was remote, but the shooting was in person and safely done. So yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
You know, and given where we're still struggling to get out of this pandemic, is in your profession, I'm sure that's got to have been very challenging. We've all adapted to this virtual world and doing things online, and in some ways, particularly even in my work, we found that we're able to reach sometimes wider audiences by doing things virtually rather than in
Right.
Yeah, have you
Yeah,
found that as
definitely.
well, or what? Do you feel that that things will go back to just the way they were before for you in your profession, or it's going to be like a mix of things?
I think what helps our team is, I think a lot of times we would say no to different stories because we didn't have the time and the resources to send someone out on a flight to go film them for an interview. And I think going forward, we will definitely continue to use the virtual interviews that we do, depending on what resources we have. But yeah, it definitely opened up a lot of possibilities for us. And it also opened up the ability for us to hire more people that we hadn't worked with before on the ground in local cities instead of us flying out like we usually do. So I think that will definitely continue as we very slowly come out of this pandemic year and a half. But it will be a while before it's completely back to the way it was, for sure.
I think, yeah, that will probably be true for a lot of us in sort of finding our new footing once things return to normal, which will feel abnormal, I'm sure, at first.
Yeah.
And given this, this wonderful film series that you participated in, all these women that you were able to interview, and there was quite a diversity among them, which is part of, I think, the attraction of the series. Yeah, I wonder what you think about the recent Oscars that we just had, where there were quite a few women that were nominated as directors, and one, an Asian American woman, Chloe Zhao, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who won, which is exciting, I think. But I'm just wondering how you feel about that.
It was, I'm so thrilled for her. I loved Nomadland. I actually had a friend who was nominated in the short documentary category, which she didn't win, but I prefer her film over the one that won. It's called A Love Song for Latasha. But I do think there was so much better representation in the nominees this year. Whether or not that's shown in the winners, I mean, Chloe was amazing as with her win, but I think more across the board would have been nice to see. In the doc category anyway, I was a little disappointed with the winners, but just because a couple of them were my new favorites for all time, so I really liked some of those nominees. But yeah, I think I'm more and more. I think maybe streaming services, production houses are seeing the value in investing in these more diverse stories. It's almost like the award shows have catching up to do a bit. So, and that's actually what Reese Witherspoon talked about too, is that streaming services give people all of this data of what audiences want to see. So all those clicks you do when you go through Netflix, Amazon, it gets back to someone.
Yeah, imagine. Yeah, box office can only do so much in that. And they can only show so much. So yeah, it's
right.
definitely broader on streaming services. Excellent. And let me actually check to see if we have another question in here. So I will definitely remember Love Song for Natasha, you mentioned, right? So I have to look that up.
Yes.
Are there other documentaries that you would recommend? You say you have, your favorites?
I loved Love Song for Latasha. I loved Time, not because of Time magazine, but it's just called Time. It's by a director called Garrett Bradley. It's beautiful, beautifully shot, beautifully edited. It's chronicling the life of this family whose father's been in prison for I think 20 or 21 years, but it really is representative of so many millions of families who are dealing with the exact same situation. And the main character, Fox Rich, is just so dynamic and amazing as a person. Another one that I really liked was in the short docs category. It's a New York Times op doc from that series. It's called A Concerto is a Conversation. It's really sweet short doc. It's really good. Trying to think. I also really liked in the feature length category a doc called Crip Camp, which is really about the disability. About the disability rights advocates that kind of all started in this summer camp up in the woods, and then they grew up and became leaders of that movement. So that's also a really good one. So those are my 4 tops.
Thank you for those. No, those are great recommendations. Yes. The Crip Camp in particular interests me because Judy Heumann is in it, and she actually worked for the State Department for some years as sort of the special representative, promoting diversity and particularly special needs. So it was, she's a tremendous lady. So I can imagine.
That's awesome.
Shows that. Yes. So, all right. I think we're coming up on the end of our show. We're only a few minutes away. So, I want to thank our viewers, for having joined us throughout this whole series. 6 sessions of wonderful interviews with these amazing ladies. And then, as you mentioned before, that these documentaries, there's so much out there, so much diversity. So we do recommend, audience, check out other, types of series like this. Certainly, there's a lot you can learn from them. Not to mention practicing your English, of course. But we do want to thank you more than anything, Spencer, for accepting our invitation 3 times to join us on this, and Diana, of course, who joined us for the other 3. And just wanted to see if you have any final thoughts for us today.
No, I just am really grateful that you guys invited us. I'm glad I could join 3 times. This has been really fun. It's always so much fun to talk about the series. And for anyone interested, the rest of them are all online. It's time.com/firsts, FIRSTS. But lots of really great ones. They're all pretty digestible and short. If you're ever bored.
Well, it's a good way to spend a few minutes just on each one. How many are there again in total of the films?
I think when we published the first round, there were 43, and then the following year we added maybe 10. So there's around 50 to 55 profiles. Yeah.
I haven't gone through them all either, but that reminds me I need to do that since we were only able to cover 6. So definitely a lot still there to check out. Well, thank you again, and I want to especially thank also our host, Sevilla Las Mercedes, for being with us, to host each one of these episodes throughout these past couple of months, and to our audience, of course, who've joined us. We really hope to see you again in the future for other types of programs. So follow us again, our embassy website, and our social media, which you can see on the screen there. For Sevilla Las Mercedes, but also for Embassy Venezuela, so that you can keep up with these events that we will offer from time to time, as well as educational and opportunities and exchanges that you can apply to. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, Spencer. Take care, and we'll hope to see you again someday.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Marcia.
Thanks, everyone.